Episode 2. We've got the ball rolling now. Welcome back. I am extremely pumped for today's guest. Unlike last week, we're going to jump right into it. Today's guest is Dr. Brad Clontz. When I had the idea of starting the podcast and I made my original hit list, or that top 50 of folks that I wanted to go after and interview for the podcast, Dr. Brad Clontz here was one of the top folks on the list. Extremely honored to have him on. I'll run through some of his awards and education background, things like that, before I get the episode rolling. Dr. Clontz here actually got his Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Olivet Nazarene University, his Master's in Counseling and Human Development from South Dakota State. Actually went on to get his Master's in Personal Financial Planning from Kansas State University, and got the doctorate's piece in this in clinical psychology from Wright State University. Dr. Clontz has owned businesses, CEO, founder of several businesses, taught at a couple universities, including currently teaching at Creighton University, Hyder College of Business. He is the co-founder of Your Mental Wealth, which he founded in 2009. Dr. Clontz was also awarded the Innovative Practice Presidential Citation from the American Psychological Association for his application of psychological intervention to help people with money and wealth issues. He has been a columnist for the Journal of Financial Planning, on Wall Street, for Psychology Today. He's co-authored 5 books on the psychology of money. I'm going to spend all of my time today walking through one of those books or using it as a framework. That book was Mind Over Money, which I thought was spectacular. His work has been featured in dozens and dozens of media outlets. I jotted down some of the more well-known ones: ABC News, 2020, Good Morning America, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post. The list just goes on and on. Without further ado, extremely honored to have Dr. Brad Clontz on the show.
It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health. For my kids and my spouse. Financially sound.
Man, I have thought how I wanted to start this. I cannot thank you enough for giving me this opportunity. I have studied your book over the last, let's call it month and a half. I've watched all 31 videos that you own and you've posted on YouTube. I am
You're the guy who watched them. Excellent.
Yeah. I have really become a student of yours, and I cannot thank you enough for the opportunity. So, man, I really, really appreciate you coming on today.
It is my pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. I typically like to start these off with just a sort of broad, generic stroke of kind of, who are you? What do you have going on today, sort of thing?
Sure. So I'm a financial psychologist, which I'm a clinical psychologist. So that's what I went to school for, to become a clinical psychologist. And then I got interested in the psychology of money. We were talking about this just before the show. I grew up, my mother likes to say that we were middle class except lower, which is, I always tell Mom, they have other words for that,
Yeah.
But I think she wished she wasn't, giving me that sort of lifestyle, and she didn't have that lifestyle herself. But I was really curious as a young child. I had friends who were middle class and upper middle class, and I looked at their lifestyle, and there were some things that looked like there were some benefits associated with wealth, and I became really curious around, how did they go about life differently? Like, what were they doing that my family wasn't doing? Like, I've got branches of the family that have been here since the Mayflower. And I was curious, why isn't our name on a building somewhere?
Yeah.
Because intelligent people, hardworking people. And so as a child, I was really curious about that and interested about that. And then as a psychologist, I became even more interested about it when I had $100,000 in student loan debt when I got out of school. And I was sort of terrified about this debt. I felt very uncomfortable. Actually, it's not a lot now. This was back in 2000 that I had this debt. And I know a lot of students now even have more who are coming out of school with graduate degrees. But I was terrified about having that debt. And I saw a friend of mine make $100,000 in 1 year trading stocks. And I felt like this was an option for me because my friend knew nothing about the stock market, which is what I knew, nothing. And so I thought, well, geez, maybe this is a good way for me to get out of debt. So I sold what I had of value, which primarily was a truck. I bought a $500 car that I drove around. I had no furniture in my house. I had lawn chairs. I was really dedicated to this experience of making money and getting out of debt. And I had a fabulous 3 months, and then the tech bubble burst. Terrible emotional experience for me. I saw myself losing my money, and I felt such a sense of shame and embarrassment. And I got really curious, like, why would I do this? And one of the things I found in my research around ultra wealthy people is they have what we call in psychology an internal locus of control. So in their mindset, they are the ones who are responsible for their successes and their failures. And so thankfully, I had an internal locus of control that was sort of built into my mindset in my training as a psychologist, which really makes you, when you're running into a relationship problem, it's really helpful for you to look at yourself versus blaming your partner. If you externalize that blame, you're just going to continue to repeat self-destructive patterns the rest of your life because it's everyone else's fault. So that's how I came about it. So thankfully, since I was blaming myself for this terrible mistake, I wanted to find out about my own financial psychology. So I started to do a literature search looking for studies in financial psychology. I couldn't find anything. And so my joke that, I'm probably the only one who thinks it's funny, but is that within a matter of a couple of weeks, I became the world's leading expert in financial psychology, primarily because psychologists had avoided the topic altogether. So I got really curious. I went home. I started to interview my family members around what it was like for my mom growing up around money. What was it like for my father growing up around money? I had these crazy stories that were revealed to me that I never knew anything about. So stuff happening for generations in my family. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, of course I made this mistake around money. It's predicted based on my whole family history that I knew nothing about. So I found that extremely fascinating. Fast forward a couple decades now, goodness, I developed that expertise further. I've done studies, many studies now on your beliefs around money and how they predict your income and your net worth. I've done studies comparing ultra wealthy psychology to middle class psychology. I'm a professor now at Creighton University where I teach classes in financial psychology. We actually have an MBA emphasis in financial psychology, which is really cool. I feel very honored and blessed to have been able to develop that program there. I also own an asset management company called Your Mental Wealth Advisors, where we manage money for typically ultra wealthy individuals. I later went back to school and became a certified financial planner. And so I do research. I do, as you mentioned, YouTube videos and TikTok videos because I have a real passion for educating people in financial psychology who are just like me, growing up, not really having people who are wealthy around me to not really understand what people do differently and how they approach things and what they invest in, that kind of thing. And so I have a real passion for talking to people who are growing up right now or young adults who are like me back then. So anyway, I'm just sort of living the dream here. I just love financial psychology. My personal mission statement is to help bring hope and healing to the world. So everything I do, I sort of funnel through that vision and that mission statement. And so many people are suffering around money and the relationship with money and stress around money. So I'm just really enjoying what I'm doing.
Yeah. And you made a couple points there. As I listen to your book and I listen to you talk here, even in that quick excerpt, I would think, and I'm no expert in psychology by any means, but I would think that you bring a very unique, and I'm going to call it sought after perspective, in your book, and I'm going to reference it a bunch of times today, but in your book, you talk about 80% Americans list money or finances as their number one stressor or problem. When I think psychology, I think of folks that stay very sort of mind and behavior focused and driven. And then I think, financial advisor, and I think of folks that are sort of facts and figures and, what goes where, sort of hard structured things, right? I don't see the two merging, at least as I think out the two roles and responsibilities. But with 80% of Americans calling money their number one stressor, the reason those two don't mix doesn't make much sense to me. But I would think with you having that kind of unique perspective and being able to merge the two early on, I would think that brings such a unique perspective. Does that somewhat make sense?
Yeah, it does. You're actually talking about, you could almost think it as separate brains, right? The financial advising world, which as you said, is very much focused on practical solutions and sometimes relatively complex financial planning type information. So it's very sort of heady in that sense. And then on the psychology side, it's much more focused on, emotions and your psychology and how it works. It's sort of a softer science is kind of how some people look at it. And so really, yeah, that's sort of if you would call it an innovation, that's really what I did. And it really came from that desire to sort out my own financial psychology, just quite frankly. And I'm very vocal about it. One of the reasons I talk about it is because of all the shame so many people feel about money. And so I make a very purposeful choice, Joshua, to talk very explicitly around how I screwed up around money, because shame really keeps us stuck. Because the interesting thing about personal finance, and this is why I think psychology is so important, is it's actually pretty simple. Like most Americans, like that 80% of Americans, and that's a survey that comes out every year by the American Psychological Association. They look at what's stressing Americans out, and money always tops the list. And the interesting thing is most people are stressed about money because of two things. They're either not saving for the future or they're spending more than they make. And I've yet to meet an adult who already doesn't know better, right? We know we should be doing these things, and therefore we feel this intense shame associated with it. And I think that the exploration into your own financial psychology, one of the major benefits of it is that shame melts away. It melts away because you realize that I could take any person and stick them into like your family system where you grew up, had the same relatives, your neighborhood, the culture, and they're going to have very similar beliefs around money that you do, which all of our studies have shown predict your financial outcomes. And so really understanding that you are playing out a legacy that has been maybe going on for generations, it sort of eases that sense of shame, which then allows us to move forward.
Yeah. And you kind of hit on the next point here, and I'm going to start to dive into your book maybe a bit indirectly, but you talk a bit about if you're able to remove, emotions and situations, most people know what they should be doing to build wealth, right? Don't spend more than you make. Invest some money into your retirement accounts, 10 to 15%. Don't use a credit card if you can't pay it off in full. There are very basic wealth building tips or strategies that people know, but they don't do, right? Just like diet or exercise or reading or anything of that nature, right? We know better, but we don't do better. And there's got to be something deeper if we know what we should be doing, but we're not doing it. And you talk about, it's passed down from generation to generation. This is your book verbatim, right? So I think the answer that you'd call that, if we asked what is that's the money script. I'd like to maybe open the floor and give you the opportunity to kind of talk through what is a money script, and maybe in that same vein or breath, kind of talk through financial flashpoints, if you will, and we'll start to unpack that a bit.
Yeah, great. I was thinking that was very well stated, Joshua, but you were reading from my book.
I am,
So I'll give an example of my own story just to sort of illustrate these points. So I mentioned that I went back and I started to interview my parents around money. And I actually sat down with my mother, my poor mother. I did this to her many times in graduate school. As a psychologist, we sort of like blame our mothers for everything in psychology. So she's like, oh boy, okay, another interview. Here we go.
Yeah.
But I started to ask her about, exactly. I know it's my fault, but just tell me what it was. And I asked her stories about, what it was like for her growing up. And she grew up poor and feeling terrible about being poor and going to a school that had the rich kids and the poor kids. It was sort of an integrated school in that sense, and just feeling terrible about her position. And she told me about my grandfather, and I was curious about that. And this is what blew me away, is my grandfather had a financial flashpoint experience. And that's the word that you mentioned from the book. And I knew nothing about this. But when he was a young man, when he was in his early 20s, the Great Depression hit. And he went to the bank one day. So imagine this, you've been saving, you go to the bank, and the bank isn't open, and all your money's gone, and you can't get it back. I mean, what an experience. Just imagine what that would be like. Oh my gosh, traumatic. I had no idea he had that experience, but it started to make sense immediately hearing that story, why my mother grew up sort of anxious around money, and she was always anxious about money. And what I didn't know is my grandfather never put $1 in the bank the rest of his life.
Wow.
Because of that traumatic experience. And so he had, based on that traumatic experience, that financial flashpoint, and by the way, we all have those. So your listeners, I'd encourage you to think about what sort of emotionally intense experiences have you had around money? And if you don't know about your parents or grandparents, what an incredible opportunity to go find out, because these experiences have a direct impact on your beliefs around money. And in our research, we call those our money scripts. And so my grandfather, and it makes sense, he had a money script. You can't trust banks with your money, right? I mean, that makes sense. It's a logical belief based on that experience. And he never put $1 in the bank the rest of his life. Died in his 90s, kept his money in a lockbox in the attic. Terrible, terrible financial move, right? Not only was it not in a bank getting, some basic interest in a savings account, it wasn't invested. I mean, he missed out on incredible potential wealth by doing that. But what an incredibly emotionally intense experience. And when you have emotionally intense experiences, and this can be growing up poor, this can be like a divorce situation, this can be any sort of emotionally intense experience. And there's a lot of them that people have. But these lead to these beliefs around money. So that belief you can't trust banks with your money, those are called money scripts. And the more emotionally intense the experience, the harder it is to sort of shake that script. And I know we'll probably be talking more about different types of money scripts. But then, of course, he raised my mother, who was very anxious around money. And now this is what's really interesting, is that I came along, I looked around, I'm like, I don't want to be poor like my family. I'm going to do what rich people do. Now, I had no idea what rich people did. And so I had some distorted information about what rich people do. And this is one of the problems with social media. There's all these distortions that come out that are total lies around what rich people do. And they're terribly devastating. I see it every day on social media. I'm very active there. All these beliefs around what rich people do and how rich people spend their money. Terrible lies. Terrible lies. None of the research actually shows that that's true. But what I did is I call it a dysfunctional pendulum swing, where I went from you can't trust banks with your money to taking the absolute maximum level of risk, which destroyed me early. Luckily, it was early in my life. And luckily, I blame myself for it. Yeah. But that's the link. So we have these experiences that we have growing up. They lead to these beliefs around money. And those beliefs around money totally predict your income, your net worth, and a whole host of financial behaviors.
Mm. And to think that, that's good or bad. The financial script is passed down generation to generation. We'll get there, but that's a nerve-wracking thought. And we haven't unpacked the different types of money scripts yet, but again, in the book, you do a really good job at sort of, I'm going to call it dumbing down in quotations for a better term, dumbing down kind of what's going on in the brain when a financial script kicks off, right? And I think you draw comparisons to the emotional and the scientist side of the brain, right? Or the reptilian and scientist type of the brain. Can you kind of talk through just maybe at a high level when a script initiates, right? And it's sort of automated and things start to run and you start to take action, kind of what's going on there?
Yeah. So we have these scripts that are unique to you as a human being based on your family experience. But it really helps to understand your entire relationship with money from the perspective of a cave person. Okay. So imagine a cave person thousands and thousands of years ago, and how we looked at the world really helps us understand our interactions with money, because that part of our brain is much bigger than the more evolved part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which has been around. That's what separates us from the animal world. But the majority of our brain is basically shared with animals, like wild animals, like mammals. And so many of our financial decisions are made from this emotional part of our brain. And this emotional part of our brain is very much focused on the social world, like what is everyone else doing? And if you think back to like what's happening in a tribe very early on, your life depended on your social rank within that tribe. Most of those tribes consisted of about 150 people, and you were very attuned to what everyone else is doing. You were very worried about getting kicked out of the tribe. If you got kicked out of the tribe, it almost meant certain death. So your survival depended on being closely linked to other people, paying attention to what they're doing. And if the whole tribe moves in one direction, there's a tremendous sense of internal panic because it means that your life is being threatened. And so we have a tendency to run with the tribe, run with the herd, that kind of thing. So this plays out all the time. It's one of the things that actually keeps people from being able to become wealthy. Let's say that you grew up in a lower income family system. All your friends are around the same level of income, your neighbors, everyone you know, right? And there's a culture that's developed around that. There's a certain way of wearing what you wear, what you eat, what you drive. We're all sort of on the same page culturally in this socioeconomic group. And what you find is when somebody is trying to get out of that group or by that, I mean, they're trying to make more money, or climb the socioeconomic ladder. All this internal and external pressure comes to bear psychologically because you're starting to separate from the tribe. And internally, there's a sense of panic. And sometimes people from lower income groups look very disparagingly at people who have money. So there's a negative belief set. And this is one of the money scripts we found in our research. We call it money avoidance. Rich people are greedy, money corrupts, that kind of belief pattern. It can make it really, really difficult because internally you have this sense of panic. So this dynamic, we call it a social financial comfort zone. This dynamic explains all sorts of ways that people destroy themselves around money. People who win the lottery, and this is a common story, and I'm sure you've heard of it, and then they end up blowing all the money. We all like to sit back and think, oh my gosh, that would never happen to me. Like, I know that's what we all think, right? Yeah. I think that too. But what happens is you have no idea how it's actually going to impact you. You have no idea how your friends are going to look at you. You might say, well, they're great friends. They're going to be happy for me. But play this out over the course of a couple years. So all of a sudden now you're living in a house that costs 5 or 10 times more than the house they had. How's that going to feel? Are they going to start to feel embarrassed coming over? Are you going to start to feel shame? Let's say you're really worried about a tax bill. You have to pay $100,000 in taxes this year. Can you tell your best friend about that? They don't even they make $40,000 a year. So it starts to put stress on relationships, and not really understanding that is one of the reasons that people will self-sabotage their ability to become wealthy. And there's ways to go around that, but just understanding that we're wired to stay where we are, it really helps explain a lot of behaviors.
Yeah. I'm going to stay in that same vein. I mean, from a financial flashpoint standpoint, and you talked a bit about what that is, and it sounds like there could be, you mentioned all of us have them, and there could be, an infinite number of financial flashpoints. Anything could be a flashpoint, right? But I think if I'm starting to put things together right, these different financial flashpoints sort of create a script, and I would think that several flashpoints could all turn into one type of script, right? And so my question to you is, knowing that you're face-to-face with clients and you're working through some of these money script issues, are there any more prevalent or common money scripts that you find and that maybe we could talk through? You mentioned a few in the book. You talked through one there. Is there any that maybe you see more often than not?
Yeah, so in our research, we have found 4 main categories of money scripts. And this is research we've done since the publication of that book. So you
Nice.
Probably didn't. Yeah. So one of them is called money avoidance. And this is the belief that rich people are greedy, money corrupts, there's virtue in living with less money, this type of belief pattern. It's very common in people who have less money. And one of the reasons it's helpful psychologically is because it makes you feel better about where you're at. If rich people are greedy and corrupt, then I feel better about where I'm at. And not surprising, this is the other thing that's really interesting about money scripts and financial flashpoints is they become reinforcing, right? So if I believe that rich people are greedy, I'm then going to engage, we call it a confirmation bias. We all have this bias inside of us. So rich people are greedy. Okay, and I believe this. So I'm going to be combing the news and Instagram, finding all these examples of terrible rich people. And by the way, you can find a ton of them, which reinforces that belief. And then I'll hear that, Bill Gates is donating X amount to charity. And he's like, yeah, well, it's probably for a tax write-off.
Yeah.
Like I hear that on social media all the time. Well, no, he'll actually make more money by not giving it to charity. Tax write-offs, you don't make money there's no net gain from a tax write-off. So it's an interesting thing where we have this mental filter, which just reinforces it. And then our friends believe the same thing, et cetera. And by the way, we're all stuck in this little bubble. It's really helpful to know this, that you have a limited understanding of how the world actually works. And if you can carry that belief to your grave, you're going to be much better off. Like, never believe you have it figured out, because you don't.
Yeah.
We all are operating within this little bubble. And the idea is to make that bubble bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's called wisdom, right?
Yeah.
When you can expand that bubble. So just as an example, money avoidance. Another one that we found is called money worship. And this is the belief set that more money is going to make me happier. It's going to solve all my problems. And it's going to finally give me what I really want in life. And this belief pattern, probably not surprisingly, it's associated with actually worse financial outcomes, because you're more likely to want to go buy things that you can't afford because you're feeling like this is going to make me happy and fill that hole.
Yeah.
And wealthier people, they don't believe that. Now, because they actually have the experience, like wherever you go, there you are, if you've heard that saying. And so whatever sort of internal angst you have about life, you're going to have it when you have more money. With the exception, and this is an important exception, there is a significant correlation between money and happiness up to that middle class point.
Mhm.
And that's not something to jump over. I mean, being in poverty is a terrible emotional experience and quite traumatic for people. We talk about that financial flashpoint. Growing up in poverty, the belief that there'll never be enough money, the fact that you're more exposed to violence or more vulnerable, this is a very real thing that can be really difficult to shake. But that poverty type experience can really be something that's damaging long term, because the belief there'll never be enough money, sometimes what happens is you're living a life where you actually do have enough money, but you can't shake that belief. So you have all this tremendous amount of anxiety. You can't enjoy your wealth. You become a hoarder. You're super cheap, which makes you miserable to be around. And it's really driven from this fear of not having enough. So that money worship is a devastating belief for people. The third category we found in our research is called money status. And what's so interesting is you've heard of keeping up with the Joneses. Well, that's actually a thing psychologically. And it's the belief that my self-worth is connected to my net worth. So they're very closely tied. And so people with this belief will say that, they'll tell people they make more than they actually do. They'll overspend because they only want to buy something new because they're worried about how people will look at them if they have something used. And in our studies, people who come from poor backgrounds are more likely to have this belief. And some of it, I think, has to do with that shame that many of us feel by not having enough and going to school, and we don't have the nice sneakers when other people do, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The fourth category, and thankfully there's a good one, right, is we call it money vigilance. And this is the category that most wealthy people fall into. And so one of the great messages for this is, if you want to be wealthy or wealthier than you are now, adopt these beliefs, because these are the beliefs that wealthy people have. And so the belief is like, it's important to save for a rainy day. Now, what's so interesting to me about that is there's a lot of people who don't actually believe that. That was sort of the shocking part about the studies for me. But it is important to save for a rainy day. One of the other beliefs was, I actually tell people I would make less than I actually do, which is the opposite of what you see.
Yeah.
Right. But it turns out that ultra wealthy people have a tendency to sort of, downplay how much money they have. They're actually the opposite of flash. They sort of downplay it.
Listen to that.
I'd be a nervous wreck if I didn't have money saved for an emergency, is another belief of the money vigilance. So sort of a combination of some anxiety about the future, which is actually really important. Squirrels who aren't worried about not having nuts in the winter, they die, right? Because they're not hiding their nuts. It really does help to have some anxiety or some concern about the future, your future self, to inspire you to save, to inspire you to not indulge in that purchase you want right now because you have the future in mind. So that future mindedness is really important in terms of your wealth. And then also some secretiveness around money. And what's interesting is they're less likely to lie to their spouses around money, but more likely to sort of downplay to the rest of the people in the world that they have money.
What's as I hear you talk through this, and I made this point earlier, but as I hear you talk through the financial script, and I even jotted this down in just sidebar notes as I was reading through your book, but knowing that your past and sort of what your family goes through generation to generation, that it turns your wealth status almost becomes predictable or predetermined, right? I mean, if you knew what I went through, and I didn't address my script, my money script, and I never addressed it, and we didn't work through it, but you knew what I went through, it's almost as if you could jot down kind of where I'm going to fall in my financial status, which is, it's kind of freaky. It's kind of freaky that it's kind of predetermined, right? And I've never thought of it like that.
It's totally true. In the research we've done, those beliefs, they predict your outcomes. Like they actually predict them.
Yeah.
And it makes sense when you think about it. If you have this aversion to wealthy people, well, it makes sense that you would repel it. And what's so interesting about this, Joshua, and to get a little nerdy, but what's so interesting is there's a high correlation between the money avoidant scripts and the money worship scripts. So imagine this. You believe that rich people are greedy, that money corrupts, yet you desperately want to become a rich person. Now, this actually is a lot of people in our country. Yeah. And so imagine flipping back and forth between that dynamic psychologically. So you start to get some success, and then you feel so bad about it because how are my friends going to look at me? How is my family going to look at me? They're going to look like I'm a bad person. So then you sabotage it and get rid of it. And there's a lot of people who get on this dynamic, and it's very self-destructive in the sense of growing wealth, but it makes sense from that psychological perspective, and it's totally predictable. So what's so interesting about it is predetermined and it is predictable unless you know about it. Because one of the really challenging things about money scripts and money in general is most of these beliefs are sort of residing around in your subconscious. They're sort of clanking around there.
Yeah.
Very few people can just go, oh, here are my beliefs around money, and they just spew them out because we don't talk about money. Money's a taboo topic. So in high school, you probably had the opportunity to experiment with relationships and to see how your friends, how their parents related. There's all kinds of talk about what makes a good, person to date or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. And so you have all these opportunities to be exposed to different ways of thinking about things. This never happens with money. Never happens with money. Nobody's actually talking about the underlying psychology around money and beliefs and all of that. So in our own little bubble, in our family bubble, and we don't really shine a light on that. So shining a light on these beliefs and on your family history, it's pure gold and it's untapped territory for you, for most people. And just understanding that this comes from a family legacy, for many people, a light can switch, And part of it too, and this is a hack that's incredibly valuable, is, and I just spoke to somebody today who sought me out on social media, and she came from a place of a lower income family, and now all of a sudden she's having success, but she knows nobody she can talk to about it. There's nobody within her network, and there's a bunch of mistrust. Like, who do I talk to about this? And that's a whole nother dynamic around the do-it-yourself-itis, I call it, from the working class, where it's like, well, who can I trust? It's like, you got to do it all on your own. And that's not a belief that ultra-wealthy people have. They actually are much more comfortable getting outside help because they need it and they recognize it. And so that's a barrier for some people to go from working or middle class into those upper echelons of wealth, is realizing they need to bring in some external expertise and ask for help.
It's funny you mentioned one of the most important places to start is finding your financial flashpoints in your money scripts. I thought about, as we booked this, my first thought of like, what should we do within the recording was maybe I should find or talk through some of my money scripts or find some of my financial flashpoints. And after, I guess, per your recommendation and book, it sounds like that'd be quite the emotional journey. I don't think in an hour, I don't think we want to take that ride. So, but I do want to give us a second to, for the folks that want to sort of do some self-reflection and get ahead of this, because, these money scripts are going to take place. And to your point, if they're embedded and then you win the lottery and they're there, you're going to take action and likely sabotage yourself, right? So before we talk about rewriting those scripts, can we talk about maybe a strategy or two and or a methodology or a way to go find your own money script?
Sure. So, just in talking with you right now, if people wanted to just pause this and engage in this exercise, you could ask yourself some questions. So some self-analysis, like, what 3 things did my mother teach me about money? What 3 things did my father teach me about money? What is my earliest money memory? Because sometimes that's some hint into financial flashpoint because there's a reason you're remembering it. What is my most joyful money memory? My most painful money memory? And to just do some journaling and reflection on that. To take it a step further, if you can interview some family members and ask them those same questions, that can be profound. The last thing I'll say is that you could just use the tests that we use in all our research and just sort of click through the different money scripts and figure out which ones you have. And that's at one of my websites, yourmentalwealthadvisors.com. You can find the same test we use in all our research. It'll send you an automatically generated report. But I think there's a lot of value in really getting that information for yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree. And at the, I guess if I could talk about, I've said a couple times, I've been a little freaked out after putting down your book of my wealth status is predetermined. So let's take a small pivot on maybe help me out. And we take the time, we take your test online, we do some self-reflection. Maybe we draw out the money egg that you talk about in your book. And at the end of this, it's time to rewrite that script, right? We know what we've got. What processes or what do you put in place for your clients, or how do you get them to start rewriting that script?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's one thing that I do talk about in the book, and I have a video on it, the new money mantra. And so I'll give you my own example. So I grew up, my father's side, total workaholics, and what's so interesting about that is trace it back a couple generations. And there was a great grandfather of mine who was total lazy, good for nothing, who did nothing. And so everyone's been trying to make up for this guy by working hundreds of hours a week. And we have no idea why. I don't even know. I can't even remember his name, my great-great-grandfather. But geez, thanks a lot, dude.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So
Yeah.
exactly. So my grandfather's a workaholic. My father's a workaholic. I'm a workaholic. And so the belief is like, really comes down to, oh no, I need to work. It's all like this internal panic. I'm not working hard enough. There's something wrong. I have to work more. No idea where it came from. But so for example, this is something that's going to afflict me the rest of my life. It's not like just knowing this is going to solve the problem. And so I had to create a little mantra for myself. And basically it goes like this, I've worked enough. I worked hard today. And then I go after a value. My children and my wife are very important to me. And so I'm going to get up from my desk right now and I'm going to leave. And I carried that little statement around in my wallet for years. And I would read it. And I would sort of because what I'm doing is I'm retraining my belief around that, So that's a great method if you can find one. Like you basically take the money script and you make a sentence or a paragraph out of it. Like rich people are greedy. Well, some rich people are greedy. Now that's a much more functional belief, but I'm going to do great things for the world with my money. And just, you have to repeat that to yourself over and over and over. So that's one hack. This other one is just gold. And it's one of the reasons that I think podcasts can be really useful for people, and so can books. What you want to do is find somebody who's a step or two ahead of where you are on your journey to wealth and where you want to be. And you need to basically find ways to learn from those people. And so, I'm not saying email, Tony Robbins and ask him out for coffee. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
But you could certainly read his books, or even a step better is find somebody a step or two ahead of where you want to be. Ask them for lunch, buy them coffee, sit down and just pick their brain. How do you look at money? What do you do with your money? What would you recommend somebody where I'm at? What should I do? What do you wish you would have done when I was at your spot? And what you're really trying to do is almost sort of create a new tribe, from the sense of, if you want to move up the socioeconomic ladder, you need to think like people who are a rung or two ahead of you, because their mindsets have got them where they are. What can you learn about them from their mindsets so that you can move in that direction? And that's really what you need to do. You really need to create a group of people who are where you want to be or closer to where you want to be, and learn from them and be a part of that culture. Because what you're going to find is in that group of people will say, oh yeah, that's totally possible, Joshua. This is how you do it.
Yeah.
Whereas in your current group of people, you're going to hear that's impossible. You can't do that. You're actually going to hear things that are discouraging, because people feel like it isn't possible because that's been their experience. So go find don't ask somebody, like if you want to write a book, don't ask a bunch of people who've never written books how to do it, because they're going to tell you it's impossible. Go find a few people who've done it, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, okay, you want to write a book? Okay, so this is what you do. You just do these 10 things.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Put yourself in a room or around people that you want to be like, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. And what you're going to find too is people are actually very open to doing that. Like,
Man,
they're very open to talking about how they got where they are. As a matter of fact, they wish more people would ask them.
yeah. Obviously, you've got far more expertise than I do, but I could not agree more. And I think this podcast is a perfect example, of everyone that I've interviewed. You guys, I'm not giving you guys any money for this. This is an outreach, and with some content behind it, and me showing, hey, I've done my research and here's what I'm looking to extract from you. Do you have some time to help me? And the response rate is outrageous. People looking to extend a hand and help people that need or want, that are willing to help themselves, is just overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
Yes. And it doesn't surprise me, because a lot of people too, this is another belief that is really devastating. This false belief around rich people, like the belief, and I did a study on this, because there's all these stereotypes about rich people that are totally false. And what they do is they create a narrative that makes it's just impossible. Like, I'll never be able to do it. And so the belief is that, rich people are born rich. Not true. Like 80% of millionaires in the United States are self-made, which replicates the study I did. Only about 25% of the people, 15% of the people in the sample we had were multi-generational wealth. The rest of them were self-made.
I love that.
And actually 75% of the people in our study went to public school. They didn't go to these rich private schools. That's the other thing you hear, like, oh, you got to go to private schools, this kind of thing. Well, certainly, great. Like, you might even want your kids to go to private school and make those connections. But most people who are in that ultra wealthy category didn't go to private school. So that's not a barrier. Don't let that excuse stop you. So these beliefs we have around wealthy people, and they're totally false for the most part, the stereotypes. So what I'm trying to say is, people who are in those positions, they have found ways to get there. They have fought against the same sort of mindset or the social pressure to not advance. And so they have found ways to do this. And so many of them are very willing to share those with you.
Man, I love that. One of the studies you mentioned earlier, and then I listened to it, I believe in a YouTube video of yours, where you had gone through and you had maybe 1,000-ish participants, and we were looking for the difference in money scripts of the middle class and I believe it was the ultra wealthy, right? We're looking at the difference in money scripts between the two classes. At the very top of today, at the very top of this call, you mentioned one of the big findings was this internal locus of control. Are there any other big findings of the differences between the two people, between the two mindsets?
Yep. So I've hit on some of those already around the money vigilance mindset. And this is another one that just, the level to which this was true blew me away. So we're talking ultra wealthy people. So these people had, like on average, they had about $11 million in net worth. Okay. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
I compared them to a group of people that had on average about $500,000 in net worth, which by the way is a lot of money too. That's a solid middle class. Somebody's doing something right when they've been able to do that. But that's a lot. The difference in that money is so different, right? Now, this is what blew me away. We asked people, how much money did you spend on your last house, car, watch, and vacation? So now, these people had 18 times more money, essentially, the ultra wealthy did, than the middle class. How much money did you spend? This blew me away. The ultra wealthy, they only spent twice as much as the middle class on their last house, their last watch, their last vacation, and their last car. So they spent, I'm pulling these numbers off the top of my head, but somewhere in the range of about $45,000 for their last car. Now that's better than the middle class who spent $27,000 on their last car. I mean, you're going to get a better car for that, but that's no Lamborghini, okay? That's no Porsche. That's no brand new luxury car. Not even close, okay? That's a nice Toyota hybrid, So that's what they're driving. How much did they spend on their last watch? Well, the middle class, it was in the range of about $300. The ultra wealthy, again, $11 million in net worth, they spent about $1,000. Okay, that's not a $10,000 Rolex.
Yeah,
not at all. Same thing with the house. They had a house that was in the range of like 400, 500,000 versus 250,000. These aren't mansions. And so one of the big false narratives around ultra wealthy people is that they spend a lot of money. Yeah. They actually don't, not at all. And it's a very seductive lie. And, when I was a kid, it was lifestyles of the rich and famous, and you're walking around looking at these like mansions and it's like, whoa, incredible. That's what rich people do. No, I mean, that's a very small subsection of ultra wealthy people who do that. And when I was a teenager, it was MTV Cribs and, now it's my super sweet 16. Now it's just any Instagram, shuffle through. I mean, it's a very destructive lie because what people do then, and it's a dead giveaway to a financial psychologist, is people start making $100,000 and then they start buying what they think rich people buy. They buy a Rolex, they buy a luxury car, they buy, Armani suits. And it's a dead giveaway to anyone who's in the ultra wealthy, actual ultra wealthy, that this is somebody who grew up poor and they're trying to show this flash because they want to prove to everyone else they've made it, which, I'm not judging that, except it's incredibly self-destructive for that person's financial health, because that's not how people become wealthy. People become wealthy by saving their money and investing it wisely, not doing anything stupid, not getting into these risky investments. And so that, to me anyway, really good to know that, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I love that almost every question answer we go through is constantly merging the psychology and the finance side of this. I mean, it's always merging the two. I think I'm going to maybe ask my question along those lines of as you work with your clients and you find a money script and you start it's not a flip switch fix, right? You can't find it and say, okay, that's it. Now moving forward, don't do that, right? You've got to sort of work through that and practice it and drill it and sort of reflect on it and go through visions and really get through that. Because we're dealing with this emotional state that's not trackable, it's immeasurable, and then this financial piece, which is very measurable. Do you put some sort of criteria in place for your clients to show, look, you're growing or you're going in the right direction? Are there measurable steps in place that we could sort of track ourselves against as we try to make these moves?
Yeah. And, the proof really is in the pudding. And the pudding is basically, are you doing what Wealthy people do. Are you engaging in the behaviors? And sometimes those beliefs trip you up. So part of that analysis is like, so you've identified these money scripts. The question is, have they been helping you or hurting you? Because not all money scripts are bad. And if they've been hurting you, those are the ones you want to change and adapt. But like some really basic things, like you mentioned at the onset, like, are you saving and investing a certain percentage of your income? And people ask me, and there's been tons of studies, done on this, like, the 10% savings rate. For me, I did more like 30. And for me, I wanted to become wealthier faster. It was
That's
just,
right.
it was just that sort of decision. I know people who save 50% of what they make. And so it really comes down to, what can you swing? And especially if you're young and you're just getting that first job, try to save 50, just keep that going, right? Because you're so used to being poor. It's like all of a sudden you feel rich. And so just from that mindset early on, stocking away a percentage of that income for your future, call it your financial freedom fund or something like that, something that you can get really excited about. And this is a hack too. We recently did a study and we saw by doing a combination of things, we saw people after 1 hour of instruction increase their savings by 73%, their savings rate. And one of the things they did is they were able to identify these financial goals and then get really specific about naming them and attaching your emotional brain to achieving those by making pictures of them, putting them on your phone, putting them as a screensaver, carrying them around with you, getting really excited about those financial goals because you're asking your brain to do what it's not wired to do. Your brain is wired to consume as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and to not really think much about the future. That's kind of how we're all wired. And so you have to overcome that wiring to achieve these goals. And one of the ways to do that is to identify these savings goals and get really super excited and passionate about achieving them. So the proof, as I said, is in the pudding. So are you taking action on these goals? And what you're going to find is your money scripts might trip you up along the way, but getting excited about that. And another great hack is automating your success. So let's say you've identified, I want to put X amount from my paycheck into my retirement account or X amount into an IRA or a savings account, whatever it is, name it, put a date on it in terms of when you want to achieve it, get excited about it, carry around those pictures, and then automate your success. So go in right now, say, okay, X amount from my checking account to one of these accounts or savings accounts, and then automate it. Huge hack because we all have this tendency to just keep things the way they are. It's a status quo bias. It's the reason why the athletic club near you, when you want to become a member, they want to do an automatic payment, right? They want to automate that because they know you're super stoked because you want to cut weight and get all excited in January. But they also know that, maybe it's going to start fading away a couple months from now.
Yeah, come April.
Exactly. But what sort of person is going to say, okay, fine, you're going to go in there and you're going to stop that payment? There's going to be all kinds of reasons why you don't do that. You're going to start to do that and be like, well, no, I'm going to go to the gym, right? So capitalizing on that, we just want to keep it the way it is another great hack.
The automate piece, both of those kind of hint at, I'm sure you have, but have you read I Will Teach You to Be Rich or ever listened to it or leaned on it? Or
you know what, Joshua, if I'm actually, I feel really honored that Ramit did this, but he actually quoted some of my research in the latest edition of his book. I'm a big fan of his work. Yeah.
Yeah. He is. So the automate your income piece is something that I was a victim to, of just not knowing. I guess, I don't know if it was not knowing, or to your point, just being lazy and it was there and I didn't want to do it. But after finishing his book, it took a total of, let's call it 3 or 4 hours to not only automate everything, but I changed banks. I put my money into an online savings account and got everything automated and it's flowing in different directions. And all of that took, let's call it 4 hours, and I didn't leave the house. I just picked up the phone, made a few phone calls, worked with some people online, never left the house, and got everything figured out. And I will never have to look at it again. I mean, I'll open it up at the end of the year to redistribute or reallocate, but I won't ever have to do anything again. I do want to open the floor because you do have that expertise, and let's use Ramit's book as an example. He's got it templated. You're going to save 10%. You're going to put 2% towards a house savings. You're going to put 5% in a Roth 401k. It's very sort of structured. With your clientele, or when you bring someone on, do you have a templated sort of, here's what I would recommend your money flow look like? And I think I guess let me stop there. Do you have a sort of a template of here's some things I'd suggest you look at?
I don't really. I love that he does actually. It's a great place to start. And he's writing it for a general audience. So mine are much more
Very
tailored
specific.
tailored to the individual. I love his philosophy, by the way, regarding that. I actually lean more in the direction of, I'd love for people to just sort of assume that they're going to be saving and investing 20%. Like
There you
just
go.
sort of have that or more, like I said. So I really do like that. I'm also a huge fan of The Richest Man in Babylon. I'm not sure if you read that book.
I have, yeah.
Love it. Just sort of classic. Like one of the questions I get all the time is, hey, should I start investing now or should I pay off my credit card debt? And my answer, or my student loans, my answer is yes, you need to do all of it right now.
Yeah.
You need to start doing all of it right now. And part of it is building those habits. The other thing that's so interesting about money is if you wait until is never going to come, because, I'm going to start investing once I've sort of settled my financial life. Look, man, your financial life is never going to be settled. Okay.
That's right.
There's always going to be something you're going to have. And then maybe you're going to have a child. Oh my goodness. So there's always life events that come. There's always outside pressure. And that's why one of the things I love is around that investment or that retirement account, you have to build a fort around that, not just a fort, a moat, put armies in front of that, take that money and just eradicate it from your consciousness. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're going through some financial trouble and you got some credit card. No. That thing is over here. That doesn't exist. Sort that out right now with what you got. Do not touch that. And that's a huge mistake I see people make, is they really, they'll go tap into that or take a loan from it. That money is sacred. You cannot touch it.
Yeah. Don't touch the principal. Oh, I can pull out the principal without tax. It doesn't matter. Don't touch anything. Leave it out there. Just leave it there.
Yep. And just making that sacred fort around that and protecting it is super important.
Yeah. Man, that's great advice. You mentioned at the top here, at the top of the call, you've got, primary sort of stream or business, obviously this psychology/financial advisor. You also own sort of on the side, this asset management company. Do you have an asset class that you push your folks towards, right? Do you tend to lean more towards real estate? Do you like looking at, I think Ramit's big on, most folks big on index funds, right? Is that you mentioned, I think at the very top, investing and building wealth is boring. So I think I know this answer, but I do want to at least get your thoughts on what's sort of the best approach there.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull back the curtain to the ultra wealthy. Like, what are the ultra wealthy doing?
Yeah,
are they all in crypto now? Are they all going to gold and burying it in their backyards? And the answer is no, they're not. Do they have the best stock pickers on the planet? No, they don't. And all the research, don't become a stock picker. This is my best advice. They have entire teams of PhDs in finance on Wall Street whose entire job is to fly to companies and read all their statements. And they run these huge mutual funds who underperform the index 80% of the time. Okay, wrap your head around that one. So if you think you're going to sit back at home and beat, quote, the market, that's poor thinking. I understand it because I had it. And it's a surefire way to keep yourself poor and to destroy yourself. So, and also like the word index fund, that's not very helpful for a lot of people either, because there are a bunch of different index funds that cover a bunch of different indexes. So what the heck am I supposed to do there? So my best piece of advice, and again, I don't know the listener, so this isn't personalized advice.
That's right.
But I will share this, that I think for many, many people starting out, a great way to go is, they've got them at Vanguard, they've got them at Fidelity, is like a target retirement account. Because what that's going to give you is a massive amount of diversification. So you're going to be owning all kinds of stocks, all kinds of bonds, international, large cap, small cap, real estate. I mean, they're designed these things very, very well. They're extremely cheap. So you're like going to probably pay like 25 basis points off the top of my head, which is like 0.25%.
Yeah.
And you're not going to have to worry about trading and taxes and screwing yourself up and all of that. And you just sort of pick the target the date at which you want to retire, and it automatically rebalances for you. It's more conservative as you go. Again, this is not specific financial advice. I'm just saying that this is, if 9 out of 10 Americans did this, they'd be much better off than trying to design portfolios and make trades and all this kind of thing. The second thing is, since your audience is sort of that millennial generation, don't worry about the stock market crashing. So one of the problems with the millennial generation, and when I say problems, is this is sort of difficult for them, is that if you've been investing, you've only seen this market tear, and it's been like the best possible market in history.
Yeah.
And what's coming, my friends, is a crash. Okay. And so it's terrifying to me, but a lot of people got into day trading again. Now, this happened in 2000 and before, and people got destroyed because what happens is they're day trading, they're doing tons of trades, they're going on margin. Oh my goodness, please don't do that. Please don't go borrow money and then trade on that. But they're going to get destroyed when the market corrects. And the market is going to correct. But if I was a millennial and, I'm in my 40s, so it crashing is going to be great for me too, because I'm going to be investing more. And so one of the best things that can happen to a young investor is the market crashes. And then you just keep buying in on those very low rates and those low prices, and you're going to do fabulous. So, you should be praying for a correction if you're a younger individual. So that solution is not only is it, more than adequate, it's far better than most approaches.
Man, I think that's fabulous advice. And I had an interview. I met with, I want to say it's Brian Dixon. I can't remember. It was a few weeks back, but they made the same point of, when we think about the market crashing or stocks dipping or the market dipping, most folks panic and at some point have to pull their money out, right? And so I don't want to see this hit zero, and they've got to pull it out versus especially the younger generations or 40s, right? Being the folks that have time, when that takes its dip and you're able to buy stocks at a lower cost. Most folks aren't buying a house, they're renting apartments because they're waiting for the real estate market to crash, right? Let's look at that in the stock market realm as well. And when that drops, it's not a time to pull your money out because, like you said, we're at a high right now and it's going to level set. When we hit a crash at some point, at the end of the day, looking long term, it's always right-sized and gone up, right? There's always been an increase. And so, if we could look at just a square one, what do you need to do to begin to build your wealth? I think that's a great first step.
Well, and another thing too is do not approach the market. I'm not even sure you should approach the real estate market like this, but market timing is a terrible, terrible idea.
Yeah.
It's a horrible idea. Nobody can do it effectively over time. And you're just going to destroy yourself by trying to guess when the top is or when the bottom is. You just don't want to play that game because you're going to lose. You're going to totally lose that game. If you won it once, you're going to lose the next time. So that's the other thing too. You find that asset allocation that fits for you. Like I said, those target retirement accounts are a great way to start. You find it, and then you just it's sort of the dollar cost averaging idea where you're just going to keep investing in it. You're not taking all your money out or all your money in. That kind of stuff just destroys people. Do not do it. It's just that you're going to keep buying into it. The market's going to go up. The market's going to go down. You're cool, man. You got 30 years. You got 40 years. Let it go up and down. You're just going to keep contributing and buying. And when it's down, you're going to be buying more shares every month as you're putting money in there. But that's the mistake a lot of people make, is that panic. I know people who sold at the bottom of 2009 and now they're calling and saying, hey, maybe I should get back in the market. That's the kind of stuff you want to avoid, is making those kinds of emotional decisions.
Yeah. Brian, I know we're up on time. I really, really enjoyed this. I could probably do it for another 2 hours. So I can't thank you enough. For the folks that listen, that tune in, they want to follow you, find you, contact you, something of that nature. What's the best way to reach you and follow you and get some of your content?
Yeah, so I've got a website, www.bradclontz.com. It has a list of all the stuff I'm up to. Also, Dr. Brad Clontz on social media. So TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook.
Awesome. Several books. The one that I picked up, Mind Over Money, you could find, virtually anywhere books are sold. I've got mine on Audible, which I thought was just fantastic. Other than that, man, I appreciate your time. For the listeners, as always, please reach out. Any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, anything of that nature. And as always, thanks for your ears and stay on that grind. So I read the book, obviously read the book a couple times before interviewing Dr. Klontz, and am still just as shook. The idea and the thought around money scripts and the impact that can have on your mental health and wealth is substantial, right? And honest to God, I had no idea coming into this book of what this was, or I think it's something that makes sense as you talk through it, right? Your history or your family's history absolutely would have a role or play an impact in how you deal with things. But Dr. Klontz made the point there that his great-great-grandfather was dealing with that was extremely lazy, and he didn't even know the man and is still working hard to make up for that. So that is a there's something deep rooted there that if it goes unturned or unaddressed can be sort of parasitic, right? And just grow within you. I really enjoyed that conversation. At this point, I've probably announced on social media. If I haven't, surprise, congratulations, you made it to the end of the episode. You get to hear this. Dr. Klontz has offered up a free 1-hour session to actually begin to develop and understand your own money script to one of my followers. I will ask that you head over to the website, to social media, to my platforms at Rhodes to Wealth to get more details around how I'm deciding or how we've decided to select who we're going to put into that or who's going to be awarded that. But in any case, I really appreciate Dr. Klontz offering that up to the following. As I mentioned in the previous episode, and I'll continue to echo throughout this season, if you will, if this podcast, if you're not chosen, and this podcast has brought any questions to mind, and maybe you have something that you've been dealing with or that this is maybe surfaced for you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Like Patrick, Dr. Klontz and I have kept a pretty regular cadence. I'd love to bounce any questions, comments, feedback that you guys have off or through him. I'll get it back over to you, and again, share it with everyone here in the following. I don't believe that's anything, or I don't believe I have anything else for today. Really appreciate your time, your energy. Please, when you get a second, hit the website, comment, review, share the episodes. It's the only way that I can get this thing to grow and continue to pull some of these kick-ass guests onto the platform. Until next week or until next time, stay on that grind.
So smooth, you know what I'm saying? Q1 made the beat, by the way, just to let y'all know what's going on. Tell them, it's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound, yeah. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound. If life about purpose, it give you something to seek in. I've been setting cash goals, financially speaking. I've been finding blessings through all of these demons. I pray to God, I give you something to reach with. See, I give you something to leave with. This life about goals and achievements. Your eyes on the prize, they hit out your mind and pray to whatever beliefs in. Teach on the way, know that the reach on the way. Gotta shine hard in the teacher's water. Know that little seed, they gon' grow tomorrow. So every day, gotta come with us. So they give you something to stand on. Make the fast off when you land raw. Make you put some new friends on. It's the road to the wealth. I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound. It's the road to the wealth, yeah. I do it for health, yeah. With my kids and my spouse, yeah. I'm financially sound.